Welcome to another episode of No Ordinary Woman, where we recognise and celebrate women of all ages and all stages. I'm Fiona Briffa, and today my guest is Sharron Keogh. Hi, Sharron.
Hi, Fiona. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really am keen to share your story because there is so much around it. Just a little bit of a background is that Sharron had been through a couple of miscarriages and had surgeries afterwards, but then was hit with a lot of other challenges following that. She had an unfair dismissal. Hubby took a redundancy. They were moving house and then lockdown. It's like, oh my goodness, how does one person go through all of that and survive? But you did, obviously, yay. But let's just go back and talk about your experience with miscarriages and what happened around that.
Yeah, for sure. So I had my first miscarriage back in 2019. My first pregnancy resulted in a miscarriage, which was obviously devastating. And I didn't know what to expect too much during that process. I didn't know who to really talk to, where to get support. Thankfully, I did have a friend who I knew had been through a few before. So I was able to have a chat with her, kind of find out a little bit of what to expect, and I guess most importantly, and something that doesn't get talked about a lot, what my body's going to be doing in that process as well.
Yeah.
And what that experience is like. And, got through the first one, 6 months later had fallen pregnant again within a few months, and then went through a second miscarriage. And that was at the beginning of 2020. So right before we were about to go into lockdown, right before I found out I was going through an unfair dismissal, right before my husband accepting a redundancy, and right before we moved house. So there was a lot happening. And obviously there was a pandemic, so that threw an added element into it. And my approach to everything is, if I can find a natural solution and do things naturally, that's always what I do. Yeah. So I did that naturally the first time and passed the pregnancy naturally. Got my period back within a period of time. Didn't think anything of it. So the second time I thought, well, I kind of have had that experience. I know what to expect. I know what's happening, which in some respects made that process a little bit easier. But then my body didn't respond and bounce back the way that I had expected. And that threw additional challenges. Do I hope my body's going to continue to pass the pregnancy? Am I going to get my period back because it didn't come back? Do I look at medical options? Do I look at surgery, etc.? And I found myself in a position where, I could risk falling pregnant again and having an infection. So by that stage, I had gone past the period of time where I could do a medical option, which would be taking a pill of some sort to help bring on a bit of a miscarriage. Or I could go through what we know as a DNC and have that surgery. So I did the surgery. Maybe they didn't do a good job, or maybe it was too long. But weeks after, I still hadn't had a period back, and then faced having to go in for a second surgery.
Oh, gosh.
And again, weeks after that, still didn't get a period, and they were wanting to do a third surgery in the space of about 4 to 6 months. And I said, no, we're not doing that. That's not healthy to go under general anesthetic 3 times in such a short space of time. And I said, right, I'm doing this naturally. I have healed myself naturally and prevented a surgery before. So I knew I could do it again. And that's what I did. I took things into my hand. And I guess the thing that's frustrating for me around all of that stuff is the doctors and the surgeons aren't trained to think in a natural approach, right?
Yeah.
And so when I was faced with that third surgery, before I went down the road of the natural options and healing myself to get my period back, I asked them, okay, so you're just guessing there's scarring in the uterus. You don't know until you go inside. So how are we going to check before we go for a third surgery if that's what we need to do? And they were throwing out, well, we're going to test your hormones. We'll give you fake hormones to test your normal hormones. And I said, well, how about we test my normal hormones with my normal hormones? Like, that seemed a little bit crazy to me, because I haven't had, well, prior to the first surgery, I hadn't had fake hormones in years. I mean, it took a long time to eliminate that from my body, and it still probably hasn't. So I took estrogen the first time to help build the lining of the uterus after the first miscarriage, and that didn't work. And I said, well, we've tried that option, that didn't work, so no, what's your next option? And until I kept pushing, and this is where I really believe people need to be their own health advocate and ask questions, and not just trust authorities because they've had X amount of years of study. You need to make an informed choice with all the information and ask as many questions as you need before you feel comfortable. And so I said, no, that doesn't sound good. Eventually we got to a more natural solution, but by that stage, I didn't even need to go through that option because I'd already got my period back. And I told them that. And the thing that amazes me is they didn't even ask me, well, what did you do? Because these are top surgeons in Sydney who have seen thousands upon thousands of cases and never once said, well, that's really interesting. That's out of the norm. What did you do?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So this is a thing, like, I think that's a really important key, is to trust your own body's wisdom and to question things. And I think we have, like, if you just expand that out into a lot of other things, is that we blindly and trustingly just believe what the experts tell us. And yes, of course, they've done all the training, but we also know our own bodies, and there's no one size fits all for treatments. But so, you know, this aside, you're already dealing with the loss of your pregnancies, and this is something that we were sort of chatting about offline, is that women don't often talk about that, and so therefore it's kind of a taboo subject. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, because it must be, and I haven't experienced that, it must be the most painful thing for a woman to go through, like heart pain. And so just talk about what sort of stuff goes through your head, just for a woman watching that may have been through it and needs to feel normal about her experience, even though we all have a different experience. What goes through your head when you lose a pregnancy?
Well, I mean, the first thing is you feel like a failure, like your body's failed you, you've failed. There are people out there who don't intend to fall pregnant, who don't want to be pregnant, and then they can fall pregnant. And it's so frustrating. And so then you question why things are working out the way that they are. I mean, I'm quite a positive person, but in those moments you're thinking, well, why is this happening to me? Why me of all people? And it's really tough. And also you feel bad, like my husband really wants to be a dad. And so that pressure and that disappointment that I'm letting him down as well, and that I can't do what I'm, you know, designed to do. So all of those things happen, even though that there are so many reasons that are still unknown as to why a miscarriage happens. You know, so yeah, the instant things for me was I felt like a failure, and I felt like I was being let down, and all of this stuff. And I guess on top of that, I still do to it today, feel like in a bit of limbo land. Like there's this part of me that feels like I am a mum. I still carry those babies with me for whatever period of time. And because I chose the natural approach, I did birth them through my canal. Unfortunately, they weren't alive, unlike other people. So there's this part of me that I have had somewhat of an experience of what a woman who has a living baby here on the planet has. And so in some respects, I do feel like I'm a mum. Because people can't see my baby in my arms, they don't relate to me as a mum. And so when it comes also Mother's Day, you don't want to wish somebody happy Mother's Day on Mother's Day, because, well, it's not really a happy day. I don't have a baby here to celebrate and acknowledge and give me gifts in return, etc. So there's this weird limbo land that you find yourself sometimes in, where you know in your heart you are, and yet on the other respect, society, I guess, hasn't really caught up and found ways to express and acknowledge and deal with and use the right language. And I guess the other thing was the few people that I told, some people didn't say things that were really supportive in those moments, and not because they were intending to be harmful or hurtful in those moments, but
just didn't know what to say.
It just wasn't the right thing to say to somebody who was going through grief and loss over their baby. So, and I think it's just something that isn't really taught so much, so people don't know what to say and don't know what to do. And like any kind of grief, what somebody might say to me that will be supportive to me might not be supportive to yourself. So it's a very tricky situation that people find themselves in when they're dealing with someone that they love who has gone through that, as well as somebody who's going through it at the time.
And this is the thing, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is with any form of grief and loss, like that you've got to process. And no, I don't think people know how to handle somebody else's grief very well, and for whatever reason. But can you tell us what some of the things that weren't helpful that people said, even if they were well-meaning? Because I think if someone's watching this, it might help you with somebody in the future, because we don't talk about this stuff enough. And I think we do need to know how to support each other and be this whole "it takes a village" thing. It takes a village to support each other through our difficult times. It takes a village to just love and come alongside someone and just be there with them in their pain, not try to fix it, not try to explain it away, but just come beside them. What could we do better to come beside a woman who has had a miscarriage to support her? How can we do that better?
Look, the first thing is just to say that you're sorry that they're going through this and that they've experienced the loss, and asking them if there's anything that they can do to help in that moment, you know. And it might not be anything. It might just be giving them a hug, loving on them, sending them thoughtful messages that you're thinking of them, and sending them lots of love. And on those days when it's Mother's Day, or whether it's International Bereaved Mother's Day, acknowledging them on those days as well. You know, not
your own discomfort, and meet that woman there. Yeah.
You know, ignoring the situation doesn't make it go away. That person's still going through it. So acknowledging that, hey, I know it's not a happy Mother's Day for you, but, you know, I just want to acknowledge, and I'm sorry that you've gone through that. There were a couple of things that I know were really unhelpful in those moments. And you know, in other situations, it may be appropriate. But, you know, one of the things that when you're just going through it and you're still in the thick of it, saying, oh, well, at least you fell pregnant, you know, you can do it again. Like, yeah, okay, that's great. I fell pregnant, but I haven't been able to hold the pregnancy. So telling me that's great news. Logically, I already know that. But in the middle of your grief, you don't need to hear that. And the other thing that people, so that was like the main thing that people would say. There was one other thing, but I've kind of lost it, so it might come up. But yeah, there were those kinds of things that people would say in those moments. That ordinarily it would be okay, but in those moments, it's
and maybe later on in retrospect or reflection might be okay, but when somebody is in their grief, and I guess it's in any form of grief, is come alongside them, and like you said, just be there, be sorry with them, be sad with them, and not try to explain it away or go into that what they call toxic positivity, to go, well, at least, you know, at least you fell pregnant, or that's not helpful in that moment, is it? It's allowing that person to be where they need to be and just love them through it and support them through it. But it is hard to do that. I'll definitely acknowledge that, because you don't know what to say to someone, but that's not helpful. I think that this is a big lesson to all of us, that we need to learn how to be vulnerable and to be, you know, even to come alongside and cry with somebody and go, yeah, that must suck. I just don't even know how that would feel.
But I think even with what you just said, Fiona, is absolutely perfect. Look, I don't know what to say to you. I've not been through that situation myself. but my heart goes out to you. I mean, that's so genuine. It's so authentic.
Yeah.
And it's coming from your heart. And it's exactly what the person needs. They don't need you to cover up and say all these other additional things. I mean, another thing that comes to mind that people would say is, oh, well, you're still young, you know, you can fall pregnant again. It's like, well, if you lost anybody in your family, would you go, oh, that's okay, you know, you can get another like, no, that
would adopt another kid, that's all right, you can find some. It's not, that's not, but and we do acknowledge that it is coming from a place that they don't know what to say, so they're saying the only thing that is coming into their head. But I think we all need to think about it a little bit more. How do we support someone going through that grief, and why aren't we talking about this a lot more, so that we as women can come around each other, like I said, as a village, and support each other? And this is what No Ordinary Woman community is all about, is about coming together and recognizing each other, supporting each other, encouraging each other, celebrating each other, and grieving with each other if we need to just support and love each other unconditionally through whatever they're going through. So just, I guess, what is it that why don't we have these conversations? Why don't women talk about the, obviously you've said that you felt like you'd failed and things like that. I imagine that is number one reason why we wouldn't share this with our friends and family, because I had a very close person to me a few years ago that went through this and didn't even tell anybody. I'm like, how could you not tell anybody? Like, I would have run to you and helped you and supported you. What is it that prevents us from having these conversations?
Well, I think the first thing is that we've got to remember is often at that point, sometimes we haven't told anybody or very few people that we're pregnant in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit weird to go, oh, I'm pregnant. And by the way, I've also lost the pregnancy.
Yeah.
So you're kind of telling two announcements at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a bit different if somebody kind of knows already something about it and then you've gone through something. So that can be really hard to tell people that in the first place. And as I said, I think there's a lot of shame about what's happened as well, regardless of whether it's justified that we're experiencing that or not. So I think that it's something that women tend to deal with more privately or with their partners.
Yeah.
Also, if you don't know anybody around you who has gone through that, you don't know if they'll be able to, support you. So sometimes I guess you kind of go outside of your normal circles to get that support. But because it's something that isn't really so widely known, I didn't know about all those places until after the fact.
Yeah.
So, that can be really hard. But what I've found is when I have shared with women that I have experienced a miscarriage, what I found is kind of like, well, me too. I had one, or I've had two, and I was shocked to hear how many people had gone through it, but I just had no idea at the time.
Yeah.
And I guess, as I said before, because our babies aren't here with us, it's not something that you just randomly always bring up with people. Oh, well, yeah, I've gone through grief too. I had this, and this, It's not something that you label yourself with. So you just kind of carry on and just go on with life. And I mean, we're not even talking about in the workplace when you go through a miscarriage, and how do you deal with that when you need time away from the workplace? Yeah. I had to tell at the time I was working in corporate still, and I had to tell my boss, and I mean, my boss was a female at the time, and she'd actually been through some herself. So that was somewhat helpful that she could relate, and she gave me that time off. But, you have to be vulnerable and share sometimes those things with people that you don't really want to be talking about your personal situation like that with your boss. I mean, heaven forbid if it was a man as well. And that's if you've got a good relationship with them. So if you don't, you start to find yourself hiding and covering things up as well, which also adds to that shame as well, because, well, I don't want to tell them it was a miscarriage. I just need to tell them need some time off. So maybe I'll say bereavement leave. Maybe I'll just take it as sick leave. But that's not even taking into account, oh, well, I have to go into surgery. Well, I just won't tell them what surgery. Yeah. So there's whole other
And then you're dealing with this mental struggle as well as the emotional struggle as well as the physical struggle, is like just trying to process all of that and how to do it. That would be exhausting.
Yeah. So there's a lot that women go through when they're going through something like that. And they feel often that they have to go through that alone and that they don't know who to turn to.
Yeah. So based on that, like I want to make sure that in the description of this video, I will put down if Sharron will give me some of the support groups that she might have gone to, but I'll also find some other ones just to put some links down, just in case there is someone watching or someone watching that knows someone, just so that you've got some resources, because this is a big topic and it may trigger. So yeah, I'll make sure that there's some support links in the description of this video. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And just so like to open this up as a conversation, and I guess, like you said, some people might not be comfortable with talking about it, and it doesn't just because I think dealing with it in your own way is very, very important. Some people might need support, some people might want to retreat, and for both women and men. And I imagine that we talk about the women's journey through this. What about the dad? What sort of stuff did your husband go through? If that's okay, don't have to mention that if that's his journey. But
yeah, look, I think for men it's a different experience. From what I've observed and through the people that I've spoken to as well, is the dad doesn't have that baby in their body.
Yeah.
So that in some respects, it's a little bit of a disconnect.
Yeah.
Because they're not having to go through disrupted periods or have the surgery, etc.
Yeah, there's no physical.
So there's no physical things. It's the emotional aspect that they have. So on the one hand, emotionally, they have to deal with the grief and loss themselves. And again, men deal with it in a different way compared to women. But again, not a lot of men talk about it. So again, in their network, well, and for me, I didn't want everyone to know. So it also, I guess, probably put a strain on my husband in who he could talk to about it as well. Because if we had mutual friends, if I hadn't told that partner, I didn't want him to go and talk to the husband about it, because we all know husbands and wives talk. So that, I guess, put a bit of a constraint on him being able to process it for himself as well. And, you know, he was amazing. You know, he was my rock through that period of time, and he was so good to me. But yeah, he's trying to, you know, hold the fort for the both of us. And at the same time, he's going through it too. So
that's the thing. You had an extra element and he had an extra element, because you had the physical element as well. He had I've got to love and support and nurture and protect my wife who was going through this.
Yeah.
As well as his own grief. Yeah, so I think that's also an important message, is how we're supporting the men in our community as well, how we're supporting the women, and how we allowing them to process, and what are we even doing? Like you said, there's no, you know, like what do you do on Mother's Day and all that sort of stuff. You know, just thinking about how could we do this a bit better and more supportive and more lovingly, I guess. What do we need to do moving forward in this space? Is there anything off the top of your head that we could be doing as a community, particularly a community of women that we have, that we could be doing differently?
Well, I think, you know, it could be just starting the conversation with the women in your circle of friends. So, hey, I haven't been through one. I don't know if you have and what that experience has been like for you. And if you do want to talk about it with me, I'd really love to hear about it from you and what you've gone through and what it's still like for you. So you could be asking the question of your friends and getting to know them on a deeper level, because I mean, often we ask the surface level questions and we really don't go as deep as what we can. And that's really where you build the connection and that bond with other people. So, and that's what humans in themselves really crave at its core. So starting the conversations, being that brave person to start them is a starting point. And also just educating yourself. If you've never been through one, And even if you have, you know, reflecting on, well, what was helpful that was said to me at that time, what was not helpful, how can I be more conscious of the people around me as well? You know, I find that I'm a lot more conscious of how I have conversations with people. If I meet someone, I kind of don't necessarily ask them so much all the time is, oh, do you have kids? You know, it's kind of like, we think that there's this progression of people, they meet someone, they get married, they have kids. Like, well, the world we live in today it's such a hybrid world. There are same-sex relationships. There are people who identify as no particular gender. There's no norms anymore.
And then there's double income, no kids, like people who have chosen on purpose not to have kids. And they're all okay. So I think, you're right. It's a way we open up conversations. Like, what sort of questions are we asking? We need to be a little bit more mindful. And what about around say, women who are pregnant and having babies? How do they approach this subject with a woman who has, are they supposed to not get excited about their pregnancy and their baby, or how do you navigate that kind of relationship?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a really tricky one, and I don't think there's any right or wrong thing, and I think it's something that just has to be kind of figured out. I think if you know somebody in your circle who has gone through a miscarriage and it's been recently and you're pregnant, I think you're totally entitled to be happy and excited, because you never know what that person's gone through before they've gotten to that point, whether they've gone through IVF and had so many challenges and fails themselves before they've gotten to that point. But I think, again, it comes down to having the conversation. Look, I know that you've been through a miscarriage. I know this might be hard for you, and I don't want you to feel left out, but I also don't want to take away the joy of what I'm going through as well. So how can I make you feel supported and feel comfortable? And I find sometimes people say, oh, well, you don't want to talk about that or something. And I say, look, I'm fine to talk about it. I've gone through the healing and spaces that I've needed to, that I'm okay to talk about it. It doesn't mean I won't get upset still. Sometimes that still happens, and that's normal. But everyone's going to respond differently and what they need. It depends how fresh. And some people may just naturally remove themselves from the situation. And I think if you're that pregnant woman and your friend is pulling away, it's just understanding it's nothing personal. It's not about you. It's not like they don't love you and they don't want to support you. They just don't know how they can do that at that moment, because they're still grieving and going through their own stuff. And just loving and respecting one another with wherever they're at.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And exactly what you said, that is an absolutely brilliant point, is to just have that open conversation. Like, I'm not quite sure, I'm excited, but I acknowledge that you have gone through something. How do we do this that honors both of us? And let's just be open and honest. And, if this upsets you or if whatever, but having those open, honest, authentic relationships and conversations is key, not just for this, but every single thing that we go through life, isn't it? And the more that we can get better at doing that and being our true, authentic, vulnerable, imperfect, up and down selves, we can have those relationships with other people as well.
And I think it also comes down to, these days we're more conscious about diversity and inclusion and what's appropriate in that space. And again, I think it comes down to educating yourself on what might be appropriate, or what are the things that you can say or do to support other women who might be going through something that you don't understand or don't know, and that kind of thing. So there's always a way to educate and ask them. But
like you said right at the beginning, what can I do to support you? What do you need from me? How can I do this well? And if it is just sit here and let me cry, great. If it is do something for me, I think that's really, really perfect. Is just, don't be scared to ask. Don't be scared to not know. Don't be scared to say, I have no idea how to handle this. Don't be scared. Just come alongside each other. I think this is the most important part, is just come alongside each other. Let the other person be where they need to be, whether it's a woman going through grief over loss of a pregnancy or any other grief that we have in life, is to learn how to just come alongside each other, not try to fix it, not try to explain it away, but just be there. I think it just really is the key, isn't it? Be there. And yeah, and I will leave links to some of those support places in the comments. Now, to sort of, I know we sort of had a few other things to cover from this, but I think this has been a beautiful conversation around it, and obviously the main theme, but this has led you through to doing what you do in your business now. You practice natural therapies, you do support for women in lots of different ways, and I'm going to also leave Sharron's links to her website and her social media so that you can get to know a little bit more about what she does. But going back to getting through all this, you survived not only that, but going through that unfair dismissal and the other things that you went through. What have you come out of this all feeling like, apart from Superwoman, by the way? How has this challenged you, helped you?
Oh, look, it's definitely challenged me. But I guess what I've learned is I've worked on myself for years, and had I not done all of that work and continued to do that work, I would not have moved through last year as powerfully and as quickly as I did.
Yeah.
And I guess that's, you know, something that I'm really passionate about, helping women to know that they can do it and they will do it.
Yeah.
And they just need to allow whatever they are experiencing in that moment to be expressed, I guess. So, yeah, and I think even in the last few months being here in lockdown in Sydney, it's taken a different shape for me and my business. And so now it's kind of morphed into resilience and women's wellness. And what that looks like is running resilience training and workshops for people. I'm super passionate about teaching people how to implement simple strategies that they can do that's going to support and empower them, because we're always going to have challenges. We're always going to have obstacles. It's just natural. There's always going to be change. It's how we respond to them. It's how we move through them. And you can either take a really long time and deal with it in a really disempowering way, or you can be really empowered, allow whatever you're meant to feel in that moment, or what is coming up for you to feel, express it, feel it, and move through it with velocity. And that's what I'm really passionate about, teaching people how to do it, how I've done it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, you know, you've just shared what I went through last year. That's not even everything else previous.
Oh, yeah, like tip of the iceberg for a woman. Like, that's why this is no ordinary woman. Like, how's the stuff that a woman deals with and then just conquers and then comes through? And I have no doubt that would just be just the last 2 years. And like you said, life is always going to have its ups and downs and be like a roller coaster. And this is why the importance of doing that personal development, mindset management, and things like that is so important, because when it does come and roundhouse kick you to the head, you are able to stand in your strength and in your own power and deal with it and not crumble underneath it. And or crumble a little bit less, because it's okay to crumble, by the way, but it's just having that psychological well-being, that foundational well-being that really just stands you solid in your ground, you know. And that's why women like you are amazing, to be able to help other women develop those skills and strategies. So I think that's your why. It's like, that's a reason you get out of bed every day, is to be able to help somebody else not have to go through something as hard as you went through it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, and it's also, I see my experiences as, you know, it's a blessing, you know, that I can help somebody, as you said, go through this so that they don't have to go through it alone and have it maybe as rough as I did it. And so, you know, I wasn't in a space to do this last year because I was still going through my own grief. I couldn't hold space for other women, but I feel like I'm now in a position where I can do that for other women. And so I'm looking at women's circles specifically dedicated around fertility and loss, where women can talk about that in a really safe space, really feel heard and listened and gotten in those moments. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not our closest friends and family who can do that for us. And that's okay. You know, it doesn't mean that they don't love you any less. It's just that they might not be the person to empower you in that area of your life that you need at that time. And so I think, as you said, sharing those links of some of the things that I found along the way, but also other groups and scenarios and circles that could be really helpful for a woman. I think
you've got to find your people.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, I guess, if you're watching these links that we'll leave, like Sharron's people might not be your people, but she'll help you find the people that are your people, because she's got some of the experience and background. So I just, thank you so much for that, just being so vulnerable and open and honest with us and sharing that very, very personal story. And I really do hope that has helped somebody, a woman who's watching this, either who might have gone through this yourself, or to be able to support another woman in your circle with some of this information that you've been given. But yeah, I'm definitely going to leave all Sharron's details in the description for this video. If you've got any comments or questions and feedback and you want to share some questions via the comments, I'll pass them on to Sharron, and I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them for you. But otherwise, find Sharron on social media. I'll leave all those links in the description as well. But thank you so very much for your time and your beautiful heart. And it was just an absolute pleasure and privilege to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much for your beautiful words, Fiona. It was my pleasure. And as you said, I hope it's made a difference to at least one, if not more, women out there, in either themselves going through it or someone that they know how to be able to deal with it and respond a little bit better next time, and learn from somebody else's experience. So thank you.
Gorgeous. Yeah, thank you, Sharron. And thank you for watching another episode of No Ordinary Woman. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, share it with your friends, and we look forward to catching you next time. Bye for now.